Muy buenos días, excelentísimos señores académicos, ilustres miembros de la Barcelona Economics Network. Vamos a dar inicio a las segundas sesiones de este 18º Acto Internacional de Barcelona y para ello vamos a solicitar la presencia en este estrado al excelentísimo doctor Janusz Kapsik, miembro de la Academia Polaca de Ciencias y académico correspondiente por Polonia de la Real Academia de Ciencias Económicas y Financieras. Por favor.
Thank you very much. Can I use it? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. President. Honorable academicos, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say something about our topic, but since there were so many excellent papers yesterday and for sure today, I would like to say something different, you know. Very difficult to say something different. So as you see, there is economics. So I will, let's say, explain what I mean by economics. It's not so easy. If you look at, even on the internet, there are so many definitions of economics that you can write a book about this. And I say, we speak about critical world challenges. It's very important, and the world challenges can be very different. But my main topic would be something which is like a short-term versus long-term dilemma. Because there is, everything in the world is either long-term or short-term, you know. But how can we use this concept in our topic is a little bit more complicated. Okay, one moment. Okay, so basically, let me start with economics. So I have some definitions, but they are not so important. But what is here important is that it's a branch of social sciences that deals with in understanding the market and economy. But what is important from my point of view is that I follow a modern view. It means there must be mathematical modeling and there must be analytics. This is without analytics, there is nothing, you know. The modern views are not, let's say, verbal. They are very, very concrete. So this is very quantitative elements. The second is now world challenges is something also very important for us. And global challenges, it means something which concerns the whole world, you know, but on different, let's say, levels it can be concerned. And in fact, to solve it, or even mitigate, not solve, we don't solve this challenge, we mitigate them, in fact. We need something like a cooperation which is international, interdisciplinary, and so on, because we cannot solve the problem by ourselves only. So there are very views. In this particular area, there are very many views. And for instance, what we followed in this conference, but also in some previous conferences, were the view of sustainable development. This is very important. This is a global challenge, you know. There must be, first of all, development of the world must be sustainable somehow. And in fact, this started many years ago in the 80s by the so-called Brundtland report. She was a prime minister of Norway. And in fact, there is no one definition of sustainable development, but it's something like that you have to develop something, you know, even there are sustainable computer science, sustainable everything now. But you have to develop this meeting the present day and future needs, you know. This is very important. Okay. And also, from our point of view, the needs and expectation of the future generations. Okay, now what happens? I will not speak about this because you know this very well. And for instance, what we have had in our previous meetings, there were a deeper analysis of this Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. And in fact, I just, you know, for information, there are 17 of them. You can see everything, they are very traditional. And you can see that, in fact, these are global challenges. Why? Because they are interwoven. There is not that why you solve one and it will be solved everything. No. Okay, so this is everybody knows, and we had yesterday, there were excellent talks about, let's say, how to mitigate, not solve, you mitigate, this is enough, you know. Okay, but there are, what is important is there are very many constructive approaches, let's say simpler, because, you know, 17 goals, how can you mitigate or solve them? It's very difficult, you know. So for instance, Jeffrey Sachs, who was a very famous economist, he gave also, Nakicenovich, who was in Yasa, where I was working in Austria with him also, and they said, okay, the sustainable development goals transformations, what they call them, is something like education, gender and equality, health, energy, sustainable food, and so on, but there are only 6, you know. So you can comprehend 6, but you cannot comprehend 17, you know, it's very too complicated. Okay, now the question is, okay, so there are some very, very general means, but do we have tools, you know, which can, let's say, help us solve these problems? Yes, there is also a mathematics of sustainability, you know, very, very strong area. There is a book even in Springer, Mathematics for Sustainability. Why? Because, as I mentioned, the modern approaches are mathematical modeling and analytics. They don't use analytics, but now analytics is something which is follows from artificial intelligence. Okay. Now, there are also many different views of what is a global challenge. Now, for instance, here, they are like biodiversity loss, climate change, and so on, nuclear holocaust, pandemic, you know, you can name it, you know, and also overconsumption, overpopulation, whatever you want. This very depends on the author, because these authors, they speak about the same practically, but use different words, you know, different words and different relations. Okay, no, but I would like to say something like this. Suppose that I am a different kind of man. For me, let's say history is important, and I look at the history of what happened with the mankind, you know. So one of the most important things are revolutions or technological changes. Agriculture, for instance, first agriculture, Neolithic, Arab agriculture, British, Scottish, and third, and so on. So what happened, you know? In fact, what was the problem? There was no problem, no climate, no environment, you know. Social changes, and some countries, some regions became very competitive. Some were not competitive, you know. This was the real change. Okay, let us go further. We go to this one. First industrial revolution, steam. Second industrial revolution, electricity. Then third and fourth. So you see, there is revolutions were not, they did not care about climate and change in this one. They cared about what? Some countries and regions become very competitive, some lag behind, you know. Some people become very rich, some are very poor, because and the last revolution is something very, very important. Why? Because there is a digital divide. People are getting, let's say, the society is stratified very well. Why? Because there is a high technology, and this technology, some people know it, some people don't know it. So I give you an example, because this is very important. First of all, let me see. I was in California, in Silicon Valley 2 months ago, and I see, okay, beautiful sky, everything, but what is the problem, you know? In San Jose, which is the center of Silicon Valley, there is like a completely different societies. One society is those rich ones who work for the big companies, those who serve them, completely, you know, separated. And in San Francisco, you see homeless people on the streets. You know, something is wrong. You know, no climate, social and technology. Then, if you go to India, I was in India 2 years last year. So the problem is like this one. Some people, young people, they go to a company, to a computer company, IBM, for instance. My friend, his wife has 5 servants and a driver. She will not drive a car because she's too high, you know, in the society. His colleagues from the who were like social scientists, humanistic scientists, they have nothing completely. What happens? These rich people send the children to the best schools, and India system is very elitist, you know. They go to a different university. It's like this one. The society, and this is a global challenge for them. Not, let's say, not even in India, where it is very polluted. No, it doesn't matter. In fact, for them, this is zero. Okay. Now what happens? Now. The problem is, my main problem is that in economics you have the so-called long-term and short-term analysis. Okay, now long-term is something like short-term is something like a couple of months to a couple of years, depend on the situation. And basically it's something which you can feel, because we know there is something, they invest and there is a result. Short-term analysis, we can understand and predict fluctuations and so on, like inflation, unemployment, and so on. And in fact, this is something which is very relevant for politicians, because they have to win elections, and people feel short-term effects. They don't feel long-term effects. So long-term effects are something like, for instance, a couple of years or decades, and they may involve structural changes. This is very important. Why? Because, for instance, if you use the modern approaches, it means mathematics and analytics. So you have to construct model, but structural change. Something changes very deeply. So your models are very difficult, but you have to do this. If you use what we do in this meeting, it means global change challenges. But politicians don't care about short term, because they have to win elections. These are the main problems. Okay, now what happens is that what is the dilemma? Okay, is the stakeholders, it means the people who play a role in this process, are inhabitants, who are voters. And there are a couple of interesting things. I have 5 minutes. Okay, the first of all is something which we normally we don't use, but we have a joint paper with Professor Fuente, and also about status quo in the model of mathematical economics. Why? Because people have something like this status quo. They have cognitive biases. They don't behave in a way which is rational. Status quo bias means that they don't like changes. These are very well known. Like Kahneman and Tversky, as the most, Kahneman is a Nobel Prize winners. Tversky died very early, so he should get the Nobel Prize with Kahneman, but he died very early. And the second is, for instance, the bandwagon effect. It means people tend to operate as the others do, So these are the so-called cognitive biases. You have to do this. Why? To include them. Why? Because if you don't include the status quo bias, you will propose very big changes. Your voters will not vote for it. This is very well known. People have some psychology of people is very complicated. The second is that people have the inhabitants, the first stakeholders of this. They have personal interests, but they are short term, because people, you see tomorrow, you have one year, but you don't see what will be in 10 years, And then there are an analyst, economist. I am an analyst because I told you, analytics is very important. This is a modern view of this kind of stuff. And they can form both short-term and long-term analysis as needed, but. Long-term analysis may involve structural changes. Their models are not so easy, because structural change is something different, completely. You have to change in the model, the very, very essence. The politicians are mostly for short-term results, but there are also people who are, these politicians are, let's say, politicians for today. But let's say policymakers are somebody who are statesmen, okay? They have to propose something very, very interesting. Why? Because they think about the country, but in the future also. And these people can eventually deal with long-term analysis, but there must be a short-term emphasis. Why? Because they are limited by what the day-to-day politicians say. So this is like a very interesting thing. Okay, now what happens? And there is a conflict between this political short-term and long-term economic analysis, which are common around the world. And for instance, the literature is very rich on this topic, and there is a literature on, for instance, how to deal with this conflict, short-term and long-term. For instance, with respect to election cycles, economic stability and popularity, political populism, infrastructure investment, and so on and so on. There are so many. There are thousands of papers about this, So you see, there is something in this. There is a problem we do in academia. It means global challenge. I don't think a global catastrophe, but a global challenge. We have to mitigate it. Solving is far away. But there is something which is difficult. Why? Because, for instance, there is a short-term and there is a long-term perspective. And there are also human beings. Human being it's always a problem in any system, because human beings are very strange. They don't behave rationally. Sometimes they can be status quo, and so on and so on. Okay, so in fact, what we do is we have to mitigate these conflicts. We should find a balance between short-term political goals and long-term economic considerations. And this is difficult. What people propose now is they propose the involvement of some supranational organization. It means something like an agency whose goal is, let's say, to help mitigate these conflicts, you know. So they are more policy makers for the future, but they know that these people here in these countries, they are politicians. They have to solve problems now, you know. So this is something which is very, very relevant here. Okay, and one moment. So this is, I think, okay, so when my conclusion, I will start 1 minute, I see. So I presented some aspect related to the use of economic analysis, but mostly quantitative and mathematical modeling and analytics. This is very, without analytics, there is nothing, you know, here, of global world challenges. And these challenges have, as a rule, a long-term character, but long-term means many problems, you know, because the future is unknown, first of all. So this is the most important thing. And in fact, what we do is that we have the development of models. For long term is difficult. And the acceptance of the result. If human beings don't accept your results, forget about your work. Well, it doesn't matter, you know. And then there is a reluctant attitude of politicians and policymakers. And we have to propose some financing of and support of long-term projects to mitigate, solve these challenges. For instance, it cannot be in the world that for some countries, because of the digital divide, they become very rich, you know, very competitive, and some are very, very, very poor. So as an example, I can give you that I am an advisor to 2 universities in China. The problem, the money they have is completely incomparable with Europe. It's completely funny. Europe is funny completely, you know. But what is the main, what we have to, we let's say advise them, what they want. They want us to propose solutions to make the country, China, and the region also, because region makes money, gives money them, competitive. But not let's say that, for instance, we will be human with human face, competitive. So I think that this is something which we have to face in the future, because money is money. Okay, thank you very much.
Muy bien. Thank you very much. Magnífica presentación y base para trabajos futuros. Bien, rogamos al profesor Jan Eskenazi, profesor de la Universidad de Tel Aviv y miembro de la Barcelona Economics Network, que pase al estrado.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci pour m'avoir invité. Moi, je suis un neurologue et je dois expliquer qu'est-ce que je fais ici, pourquoi je ne suis pas un économiste. Alors, je vais vous raconter une petite histoire pour que vous compreniez pourquoi je vais vous parler aujourd'hui ici. Alors, j'ai rencontré le président, M. Jaime Gilaluja, il y a 16-17 ans auparavant, dans des congrès de Penser l'Europe dans l'Académie de Bucarest. Et après 3-4 ans, à un moment donné, on s'est trouvé sur la même orbite. Cela veut dire on parlait de l'entropie dans les lois de la thermodynamique et Monsieur le Président, il parlait dans son langage de physiologue et moi je parlais dans mon langage de neurologue. Mais quoi qu'on parlait des langues différentes, on parlait de la même chose. Et alors la conséquence, c'est qu'après quelques années, je me suis trouvé membre de ce network et c'est pour ça que je vous parle. Je suis le 3e conférencier aujourd'hui. 13e, c'est pour moi un bonheur parce que moi je suis né le 13 novembre. Alors d'habitude, cela me porte bonheur. Et alors je veux vous dire qu'aujourd'hui, comme le 3e, j'ai rencontré et j'ai entendu énormément beaucoup de très illustres conférenciers qui ont parlé de tout. Ils ont parlé de l'influence sur l'économie, de l'économie à cause de changements de l'écosystème et de changements climatiques. ils ont parlé des effets de l'économie sur la philosophie. Mon ami Mohamed Laïchoubi, il a parlé des influences sur la philosophie. On a parlé des influences sur la société, sur la politique, sur la démocratie, sur la culture, sur tout ce que vous voulez, l'éducation. Et moi, je vais vous parler aujourd'hui de l'influence du changement climatique et du changement de l'écosystème, de nouveau et l'écosystème, sur notre corps et sur notre cerveau, sur tous vos corps et tous vos cerveaux. Et c'est le but de ma conférence aujourd'hui. Alors, la Terre a commencé il y a 4 billions d'années et demie, et la vie a commencé après 1 billion d'années après. Cette vie est fragile et transitoire. Dans les derniers millions d'années, plus précisément dans les derniers 900 000 ans, alors le primate hominide Australopithecus robustus, qui avait alors le nombre de 10 milliards de neurones, il s'est transformé en Homo sapiens pendant tout ce temps. Et qu'est-ce que c'était la plus grande signification? C'était que le cerveau qui était 700 grammes, il est aujourd'hui comme tous les cerveaux, comme tout notre cerveau, de 1350 jusqu'à 1000, cela s'est doublé. Cela veut dire, et c'est à cause de quoi? À cause de l'apparition de ce néocortex qui a transformé les 10 milliards dans 100 milliards dans notre cerveau, et ce sont la région où se passe tout le règlement, tout le contrôle de tout ce qui se passe dans ce monstre qui s'appelle le cerveau humain et dans ce néocortex. Alors, ce que j'ai réalisé dans mes études, c'est de vous dire aujourd'hui que jusqu'à 8000 ans auparavant, il y avait 5 millions d'êtres humains sur la planète, et nous vivions en harmonie avec la nature. Aristote, il appelait cela l'eudémonie. Cela veut dire l'harmonie entre la nature et les êtres humains sur la planète. Mais après, un écosystème disharmonique est apparu 8000 ans avant, et il s'est substitué à l'eudémonie d'Aristote. Alors, ce génie, en 1819, il a parlé et démontré la surmultiplication des humains. Il a écrit ce livre, An Essay Principle of Population, et il a dit les effets sur human happiness, sur le bonheur des hommes. Il a écrit cela. Qu'est-ce que cela veut dire? Dans d'autres mots, cela veut dire que la comparaison entre le progrès arithmétique des moyens de subsistance, il se rencontre avec la manifestation exponentielle de la surcharge humaine sur la planète. Pour traduire cela plus simple, la surmultiplication des humains par jour, il y a un surplus de 235 000 Homo sapiens sur la planète. Cela veut dire chaque an, il y a plus de 81 millions de Homo sapiens sur la planète. Maintenant, laissez-moi parler quelques mots. Je répète à tous ces illustres communications que j'ai entendues, les 12 avant de moi, qui ont présenté les effets de l'écosystème, des changements climatiques sur tout ce que j'ai déjà mentionné. Et maintenant, laissez-moi parler de leur effet sur notre corps et notre cerveau. Mais d'abord, je veux rappeler seulement, quoique je me répète, la disparition de la biodiversité, la pollution, la descente des ressources d'eau, la migration, le trou d'ozone, le changement climatique et le fait de serre qui a préoccupé les spécialistes, les phases spécialistes, le réchauffement moyen de 2,5 degrés Celsius est irréversible. La fonte des glaciers fait monter le niveau des océans jusqu'à 6 mètres. L'effet de serre fut découvert par Joseph Fourier en 1824. Et le dioxyde de carbone est 9%. Il augmente la chaleur sur la Terre et sur nos corps et sur nos cerveaux. Les algorithmes de décarbonation vont aider à la réduction des émissions de gaz. C'est l'algorithme qui a présenté notre président Jaime Gil Aluja en 2023. Le processus, pour me faire comprendre, je dois vous dire 2 mots sur le procès de homéostasie. Maintenant, quand nous sommes ici, relaxés, dans cette salle, nous sommes dans un état de homéostasie. Entre nous et l'environnement, il y a une harmonie. Maintenant, ces 2 génies, Claude Bernard et Walter Bradford Cannon, ils ont distingué dans ce procès d'adaptation permanent de notre cerveau à l'environnement, l'état de homéostasie, comme celui de maintenant, est entre 2 états de homéostasie. Cela veut dire le changement climatique. Ce n'est pas une progression linéaire harmonique de 2,5 se passe dans notre vie, tout est à spirale, sinus et cosinus. Et entre les états de homéostasie et de holesthésie, il y a cette situation que vous voyez ici. Il y a des mondes incapables de revenir à notre homéostasie. Maintenant, l'Association américaine de psychologie considère que 58% des adultes souffrent de l'éco-anxiété. Cela veut dire, faites la statistique entre nous 35 personnes ici et tous les 8 milliards de peuples sur la planète, combien d'entre nous souffrons d'une certaine anxiété causée par le changement climatique et le changement d'écosystème. Dans la littérature médicale anglo-saxonne, on parle de eco-anxiety, eco-grief, climate doom. Maintenant, le prix Nobel, maintenant j'arrive au point central de ma conférence. Le prix Nobel de 2021 de psychologie et médecine, David Julius et Ardem Patapoutian, découvre les récepteurs de la température et du toucher. Je vais vous présenter ici les canaux. Vous savez, par ici, le calcium, il entre et il sort. Et il influence certains canaux et il influence certains récepteurs, qui est celui de TRPA1 et 710, qui, au moment où ils sont troublés, ils provoquent la douleur neuropathique et une sensation de chaleur paradoxale. Nous ne pouvons pas sentir cela, mais si on compare notre état dans les derniers 5 ans et dans les derniers 2 ans, on peut sentir qu'il y a un changement de notre... Nous sommes un peu plus fatigués. Nous avons une certaine anxiété qui est très fine, mais elle existe. Cela veut dire l'écosystème, il nous change, il change notre cerveau. Les douleurs neuropathiques et viscérales causées par l'augmentation de la température et la prolongation des périodes d'allostatie. Alors, je veux dire que tout ce qu'on écrit, les articles, en Angleterre, en France, à Luxembourg, dans tout le monde. Alors, le syndrome de dysfonctionnement de l'écosystème, le SDI, que je présente ici pour la première fois, Cela veut dire, vous pouvez interpréter que c'est la science-fiction, mais moi, je considère que c'est la vérité. C'est qu'il y a une symptomatologie, un stress, trouble de sommeil, maux de tête, nervosité, conscience, régulation émotionnelle, une certaine agressivité qui existe en nous d'après tout ce qui se passe dans le monde en ce qui concerne le changement climatique et le changement d'écosystème. Il y a aussi, ils ont commencé à décrire un syndrome distinct qui a été décrit sous le nom de solastalgie. C'est une petite mélancolie qui vient apparaître et qui n'existait pas avant. Maintenant, la dernière chose que je veux mentionner, c'est seulement 3% de terres de la planète qui sont écologiquement intactes. Ce sont ces régions, cela pour vous faire plus optimiste après mon très difficile conférence que j'ai présentée. Alors, je vous remercie pour votre attention et le syndrome de dysfonctionnement de l'écosystème que je présente aujourd'hui, je crois que tout le monde va comprendre que cela existe dans quelques années, dans les années qui viennent. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias, querido profesor. Un ejemplo del fruto que da el hecho de reunirnos gente de orígenes científicos distintos. Interesante. Y además, oiga, yo le voy a pedir una copia porque alguna cosa me va a servir por un trabajo que estoy haciendo, citándolo, evidentemente. Muy bien, estupendo. Por favor, el señor primer ministro Petre Román, haga uso de la palabra.
So, Señor Presidente, dear colleagues, the subject of my intervention is the expectation mechanism of economics under the uncertainties related to the climate. On one hand, the unusual and unexpected combination of climate events, and on the other hand, the necessary change of the economic thinking. And introducing, in a way, this concept of expectation mechanism, in spite of seemingly an oxymoron, expectation mechanism. How is it possible? Now, there is a Romanian joke, I think very significant. There is a voyager lost in the mountains, in the Carpathian Mountains, exhausted, and suddenly he sees a wagon pulled by a horse, so great relief. He stops the farmer, "May I join you?" "Yes, of course." So then the voyager asks the farmer, "Are we far from the city?" "No." "Wonderful." So they went minutes, hours. Then the voyager asks again, "Are we far from the city?" "By now we are quite far." So there is a deep wisdom inside. It is not enough to be on the right road. It is so important to move into the right direction. That's about expectation. We are facing, to shock you a little bit, the assault of irregularity, of disorder, of complexity. But this assault is not just today. It has a long history. in our times we have experienced an exceptional intensification of them. And now I'm coming back to science, as they are essentially opposed to theory, to hypothesis, and to generalization. Chaos and complexity certainly put limits on what we can know. High complexity, asymmetry, or nonlinearity are themselves universal types of imprecision. Before I enter to the field of economics, I'd like to give you some examples related to the climate change, of course. Just 2 days ago, being in Brazil in another conference, a very interesting one, about the system change for economic transformation. I gave this example of the Amazon forest. Is one of the key examples of the most formidable and also unpredictable interconnectivity in nature and society. You know that if the Amazon forest would not be there, would have suddenly a terrible increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere with terrible results. Another example, the unusual combination of a strong El Niño hurricane in the Pacific Ocean and a strong shift in temperatures across the Indian Ocean called IOD could and do intensify heat and drought in Australia and Southeast Asia and lead to flooding in East Africa. The same combination. In 1997 to 1998, that period cost the global economy trillions of dollars. Both strong events at once could reinforce or cancel out each other's influence in complex ways and unexpected ways. It might be good news in one place and bad news somewhere else. Another example, also we don't speak too much about that, and I'm telling you why. In the Pacific, just west of the coast of Ecuador, place, there is a huge area, like a tongue in the ocean, where the water on the surface is not warming. It's getting colder. And we don't know why. But if someday that abnormality turns normal, I mean, it's starting to warm, we can have a disastrous result. You know, as a scientist, as a hydrologist, a scientist in the physics of environment, I do not work anymore in politics, and I'm extremely happy that I was able to be back in science. So I continue to work in that field, and I know what means approaching a critical threshold. I myself, in my many years ago, in my research on the Danube River, I found out and faced such a critical threshold. And remember, the Danube, it's one of the biggest natural bodies on the planet. So approaching a critical threshold is that after somehow slow accumulation, like the carbon dioxide or other kind of indicators, it comes a moment when is the critical threshold. After that, there is no more control on the dynamics, on the evolution of that phenomenon. And my feeling, I'm not the only one, is that on what is, let's say, globally climate change, it might be that we are approaching such a critical threshold. I do not want to to make you are already very well accustomed to this. But now I'm turning to the problem of the essentially my proposition is that if the economy is a thing that changes and should change, and if our goal is structural change, as it should be, then it makes sense to invest in new technologies and new systems. I give you one example. The solar power. The solar power fall in cost over the past 45 years, fall in cost by a factor of 10,000 times less in solar power. That's new thinking, that's new technology with formidable results, exceptionally good results. Economists proposed as a remedy, the carbon pricing, to put a price on carbon. But something is wrong with that. It didn't work. Why? Because the corporation just bought the so-called credits, and the things stay the same. Carbon pricing, still today, many consider that it's a good solution. It's like, no, it's to put the burden of developing new technology on the past technologies. Like, for instance, to develop the cars on putting a tax on horses. It never happened. It cannot work like that. Or I gave you another example, is to create, we have created the internet on taxing the letter writing. It's the same. No. We are using and continue to use old economics, and namely the economics of equilibrium. That is essentially important in order to model, mathematically model. And it's the only way to do it, equilibrium in the sense of the balance between the demand and the offer, because supply and demand in the market are equal to each other. That's the idea. That came because the economists, as I told you, wanted that their science, economics, to be like science, using, of course, mathematical modeling. But in economics, equilibrium is defined, in fact, as a situation where nobody has any reason to change their actions. So the status quo continue. The risk of climate change should change completely this attitude. And what is then the alternative? what is then the alternative? There is a new approach called complexity economics or evolutionary economics. Every day we have more and more arguments to say that we are confronted with the complexity of systems. Two years ago, Giorgio Parisi got the Nobel Prize on his long work about the complex systems. This is, and we understand that very easily, even a very tiny perturbation, change of the initial conditions on which the system was set can, and in many times do, make the system to be unstable, which is to evolve into a state of chaos, where nobody can anymore control. I was relating that to the critical threshold, and this is imparable. That's what a complex system is. So the new economics should be about something which could really help. ¿Qué más? 5 minutos o qué? ¿Hemos terminado ya? ¿Cuántos minutos?
Ya, has cumplido.
Ah, ya he cumplido. Bueno, entonces...
Puede continuar, señor primer ministro.
Bueno, puedo continuar. Entonces, to say that the true pragmatic economics, which is very much needed today, is really about creativity, an economics based on creativity, new solutions, new technologies, because that's the way in which we can have a true, to put it simple, once a new solution, technology becomes competitive, and we know when it becomes competitive, like the solar power, once we achieve the status of competitivity, then it can be regulated in order to force the investors to invest in these new companies. That is very different from what has been done until now. And now, really to finish, working in science in general and in economics in particular, working in science is to be impatient and patient simultaneously, which I'm proposing to you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, excelentísimo doctor Petre Román, rector de la Universidad Suiza de Ginebra, por sus aportaciones, y con esta conferencia finalizamos la quinta sesión y vamos a empezar de inmediato la sexta con la llamada al ilustrísimo doctor José María Saravia.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Excelentísimo señor presidente de la Academia, excelentísimos académicos, excelentísimos miembros de la Barcelona Economics Network y excelentísimos miembros de la Escuela de Economía Humanista de Barcelona. Hoy nos reunimos para abordar un tema urgente y crucial. Y es que nos señala la ciencia económica ante los límites de la vida en el planeta. Dentro de este contexto, en el siguiente trabajo vamos a abordar una cuestión importante, que es el tema de la extinción de especies, haciendo uso de modelos tanto económicos como ecológicos, que es realmente donde se están haciendo ahora las aportaciones pues, más novedosas. Hay que decir que la pérdida de biodiversidad es un fenómeno cada vez más frecuente y que plantea preguntas muy relevantes sobre los límites de la vida en el planeta. Por ejemplo, según la Unión Internacional para la Conservación de la Naturaleza, más de 42.100 especies están amenazadas y en peligro de extinción, lo que representa aproximadamente el 28% de las especies estudiadas por una organización importante, que puede ser una aproximación del porcentaje de especies que están en peligro de extinción en el planeta. Un ejemplo alarmante de esta crisis se manifiesta en España, donde la sequía relacionada con la crisis climática ha desencadenado las primeras extinciones masivas de plantas y aves en las tablas de daimiel. La masiega, que seguramente algunos de ustedes conocerán, es una especie vegetal en este ecosistema clave que ha desaparecido completamente, y luego el escribano palustre, una ave emblemática de las tablas de daimiel, ha perdido alrededor del 90% de su población. Según estudios recientes, estos sucesos, sin lugar a dudas, nos llevan a reflexionar sobre la necesidad premiante de abordar la extinción de especies y estudiar cómo mitigar esta extinción y, sobre todo, el cambio climático. Desde el siglo XVIII existen modelos para abordar esta dinámica de poblaciones. Fundamentalmente, los modelos, digamos, clásicos para estimar o permitían estimar el número de ejemplares vivos de una especie. Hoy en día, la mayoría de estos modelos incorporan ya factores de tipo climático, porque ignorar los factores de tipo climático darían lugar a lo que es una subestimación del riesgo de extinción. Según un estudio reciente de investigadores de la Universidad de Arizona, la predicción de la distribución de especies y el riesgo de extinción deben considerarse factores más allá del clima. En esta charla vamos a explorar un total de, brevemente, de 6 modelos de extinción. Son diversos modelos que aporta tanto la ciencia económica como la ecología y otras ciencias, ¿no? Bueno, en primer lugar, vamos a revisar los modelos clásicos de dinámica de poblaciones junto con los llamados modelos estocásticos de nacimiento y muerte desde una perspectiva moderna, ¿no? Introduciendo lo que se llama el ruido ambiental. Vamos a continuar con modelos de extinción basados en enfoques bayesianos, para continuar con modelos bioeconómicos de optimización dinámica, que es una parte importante que aporta la ciencia económica a toda la cuestión de la extinción. Y seguiremos con una breve referencia a unos modelos basados en umbrales, que son bastante interesantes, y vamos a finalizar con unos modelos muy recientes, que por supuesto están basados en modelos computacionales, que lo que nos proporcionan es la distribución de especies y luego nos permiten incorporar, debido a las técnicas nuevas de machine learning, etcétera, de ciencia de datos, bueno, por los factores ambientales, ¿no? Que es una cosa pues, bastante interesante. Comenzamos entonces con los modelos clásicos basados en dinámica de poblaciones. Este tipo de modelos establecen, bueno, pues una ecuación básica que modeliza la tasa de variación de la población como diferencia, como saldo entre lo que es la tasa de natalidad y la tasa de mortalidad. Las diversas hipótesis sobre estas tasas de nacimiento y estas tasas de mortalidad nos llevan a una selección de 4 modelos, de las que vamos a charlar, a comentar brevemente, algunos ya clásicos. Por supuesto, el modelo de Malthus, ¿no? Que ha comentado el profesor Jan Askenazi en su charla. El modelo de Beruls, luego un tercer modelo más flexible que conduce a la posibilidad de extinción, y dentro de esta primera parte hablaré también del modelo de competición de especies de Lotka-Volterra, que es un modelo bastante conocido en extinción de sistemas. El modelo de Malthus del año 1798, como todos sabemos, supone que las tasas de natalidad y mortalidad son proporcionales al tamaño de la población, dando lugar a una ecuación diferencial muy sencilla que nos permite obtener cómo va a ir esa población. Entonces las soluciones que se obtienen son extremas. O sea, de hecho, la población o bien crece sin límite, O sea, es decir, se produce una explosión de la población, lo que lleva al desastre si efectivamente los recursos crecen en progresión aritmética, o bien se extingue completamente. Es decir, es un modelo de Malthus, fue una primera aproximación, es un modelo inicial, es limitado y con hipótesis que realmente pues, no son realistas. Luego, el segundo modelo clásico es el modelo de Berus, en 1838, que mejora la propuesta inicial de Malthus e introduce la idea de que el crecimiento se ralentiza a medida que la población se acerca a un umbral, obteniéndose como solución la bien conocida ecuación logística, ¿no? Esta ecuación nos permite modelizar cuál es el estado de la población y la solución es que lleva a un estado estacionario. Otro modelo interesante dentro de lo que es esta clasificación dentro de la dinámica de población supone que la tasa de natalidad, en este caso, crece de una manera proporcional al cuadrado de la población y la tasa de mortalidad se mantiene proporcional al tamaño. Estas dos hipótesis tan sencillas nos llevan también a una modelización que conducen a una extinción progresiva de lo que es la población. Y luego, dentro de estos modelos clásicos de dinámica de poblaciones, se encuentra el modelo de Volterra, que seguro algunos de ustedes conocerán, también llamado modelo de ecuaciones predador-presa, que se usa para representar dinámicas de sistemas de población en las que dos especies compiten. Bueno, estas dos especies se corresponden con la especie predadora, que es la especie dominante, y la especie presa, que es la dominada. Bueno, este modelo, ya digo, es bastante conocido. Entonces establece un sistema de dos ecuaciones diferenciales que describen tanto lo que es la evolución de la especie predadora como el comportamiento de la presa. Entonces, ¿cuál es la solución a que nos lleva este sistema? La dinámica de este modelo, en el caso que tengamos dos especies, técnicamente sin un punto fijo, conduce irremediablemente a que una de las especies se extinga, mientras que la otra sobreviva. Este resultado es interesante porque se puede extender al caso de más de dos especies en competición. De modo que si tenemos pues, un total de n especies, como resultado todas las especies menos una, que va a ser precisamente la especie digamos, más dominante, van a desaparecer progresivamente hasta que quede únicamente esta especie dominante. Bueno, a continuación hablaremos de los modelos de nacimiento, los modelos estocásticos de nacimiento y muerte y variaciones más modernas introduciendo ruido ambiental. Los modelos estocásticos de nacimiento y muerte es una herramienta clásica en el estudio de la dinámica de poblaciones desde un punto de vista estocástico, son de naturaleza markoviana y permiten transiciones de un solo paso entre los nacimientos y las muertes, ¿no? Con tasas dependientes del tamaño de la población. Este modelo recientemente se puede enriquecer introduciendo un componente estocástico adicional por medio de las correlaciones que hay entre los estados, cosa que no permitía pues, el modelo de nacimiento y muerte clásico, ¿no? También, entonces, esta correlación es lo que se llama ruido ambiental, y este ruido se puede incorporar matemáticamente mediante una ecuación que se llama ecuación de Fokker-Planck. Entonces, recientemente, investigadores, Kamenev y otros, han demostrado que este ruido ambiental puede dar lugar a una reducción de tipo exponencial en el tiempo medio de extinción, es decir, que la extinción se va a acelerar incluyendo los factores, digamos, ambientales, que conduce a una situación irremediable de desaparición de la especie y, desde luego, este modelo además ha sido validado numéricamente mediante simulación numérica. Bueno, continuamos con los modelos bayesianos, estadísticos bayesianos de extinción. Este tipo de modelos son de uso habitual en estadística económica y permiten incluir aleatoriedad en hipótesis iniciales por medio de lo que se llaman distribuciones a priori sobre los parámetros que acomodan la información disponible. En este sentido, algunos de los datos relativos a distribución de especies presentan datos mixtos. Datos mixtos significa que son algunos datos que presentan información certera y otros datos que tienen información incierta, o sea, es decir, no segura. En consecuencia, lo que es la metodología bayesiana es una herramienta que es útil y valiosa en este contexto, y se han aplicado con éxito al caso de especies que se creían extintas, ¿no? Utilizando procesos de Poisson para contar el número de individuos y efectivamente la metodología bayesiana. Luego utilizan para la decisión o calcular la probabilidad de extinción lo que se llama el factor Bayes. Bueno, a continuación pasamos a comentar los modelos bioeconómicos de optimización dinámica. Bueno, para la explotación de recursos renovables, como la pesca se utilizan estos modelos denominados modelos bioeconómicos. Estos modelos combinan, por un lado, lo que es la evolución de la población junto con su explotación para el consumo humano y permiten optimizar el recurso como modelos económicos que son. La función objetivo es la función habitual que se usa, por ejemplo, en análisis de inversiones, en análisis de coste-beneficio, y es el valor presente descontando los ingresos futuros netos. Este modelo económico es muy interesante porque permite obtener, entre otras cosas, el equilibrio óptimo de las poblaciones de peces. Además, permite valorarlo económicamente, el volumen de la población, incluso el valor actual de los ejemplares restantes. En resumen, es un modelo realmente interesante y permite hacer diversas valoraciones de tipo económico, ¿no? Es importante reconocer que estos modelos bioeconómicos son importantes para comprender y estudiar la evolución de las especies explotadas y permiten predecir si estas especies, en este caso las poblaciones pesqueras, van a llegar hasta la extinción bajo explotación. El siguiente grupo de modelos que quería hablar se refiere a los modelos de población con umbrales de extinción. Bueno, estos modelos incorporan umbrales o límites de extinción, modelizando lo que se llama el efecto Halley. Bueno, este efecto lo que señala es que en especies cuyo tamaño de la población es limitado, no es posible que los individuos se reproduzcan entre sí. Entonces, al no existir un número suficiente de individuos, este efecto se puede modelizar mediante diversas metodologías, pero utilizando ecuaciones diferenciales de tipo no lineal, de modo que nos pueden ayudar a entender diversas dinámicas en las que un número mínimo de individuos es esencial para la supervivencia de esta especie. Finalmente, pues la última clase del tipo de modelos de extinción que quería comentar se refieren a son los denominados modelos modernos de distribución de especies que presentan, como ya comentaba al principio, un fuerte componente computacional en su evaluación y en su implementación. Estos modelos de distribuciones de especies tienen la virtud de que, por un lado, modelizan lo que es la distribución de especies mediante modelos probabilísticos, pero además correlacionan lo que es la distribución geográfica de las condiciones de la especie, es decir, las condiciones ambientales. Por lo tanto, es posible incorporar, además de los modelos, por ejemplo, que hemos visto, se pueden ir actualizando conforme llega toda la información relativa al ambiente donde se mueve la especie. Las diferentes metodologías hacen uso de técnicas modernas de machine learning, de análisis de datos y sobre todo de la técnica de validación cruzada, que es una técnica importante que nos permite validar el modelo, o sea, estudiar si efectivamente el modelo funciona bien a partir de los datos. Además, este tipo de modelos usa intensivamente pues, la computación, y hay un software moderno pues, muy conocido que es el XVIII, que está implementado en un lenguaje de computación R y destaca como una herramienta muy valiosa para el uso de estos modelos que nos ayudan a reducir lo que es el riesgo de infraestimación, que es lo que suele ocurrir en los modelos que hemos visto de extinción, y mejora la capacidad predictiva. Hay que señalar que, aunque estas metodologías pueden ayudar efectivamente a prever lo que es la extinción, el uso específico para este propósito en el caso de los modelos de distribución de especies, incluyendo estos factores ambientales, ha sido lógicamente objeto de algunas críticas, ¿no? Bueno, y como conclusiones finales del trabajo quería señalar las siguientes. Bueno, en primer lugar, porque hemos explorado una variedad de modelos que abordan la extinción de especies utilizando diferentes metodologías, ¿no? Hemos comenzado con los modelos clásicos de dinámica de poblaciones. A continuación hemos visto los procesos de nacimiento-muerte, procesos estocásticos de nacimiento y muerte, y luego estos procesos recientemente, digamos, corregidos con el ruido ambiental, que de lo que aprendemos de este tiempo de extinción se acelera y además de forma exponencial. Y luego finalmente hemos continuado con los modelos dinámicos bioeconómicos que presentan una perspectiva de la extinción económica, pero realmente podemos prever un montón de factores económicos. Luego hemos revisado también enfoques estadísticos, modelos con enfoques estadísticos de carácter bayesiano, además de modelos computacionales de distribuciones de especies. Es interesante señalar que cada una de estas alternativas ofrece una visión diferente y única sobre la cuestión. La colaboración interdisciplinar y el uso de todas estas herramientas modernas y avanzadas, como el software XVIII, son esenciales para comprender y abordar la cuestión de la extinción de especies. Y, por supuesto, recordamos que la demografía y sus avances a lo largo de los siglos nos proporcionan la capacidad de anticipar y actuar frente a la inminente extinción de especies en nuestro planeta, que es un hecho que tenemos aquí. Y, desde luego, la perspectiva histórica e integración de métodos avanzados nos guiarán hacia un futuro en el que la biodiversidad florezca, asegurando así la salud del planeta y el de generaciones venideras. Y, bueno, señalar que este trabajo ha sido realizado en colaboración con la profesora, con la académica y profesora Montserrat Guillén. Bueno, es todo. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for your attention. Y muchas gracias por su atención.
Muchas gracias, profesor don José María Saravia. Y vamos a continuar nuestros trabajos rogando al excelentísimo doctor Pier Giuseppe Morone, profesor de la Universidad Unitelma Sapienza de Roma, que venga a exponer su ponencia.
How does it work with to move the slides? Okay. So, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here today to discuss about the research lines that we are developing in my university and my research group, which is the Bioeconomy in Transition Research Group. Very briefly, setting the framework, there are some mega trends that we have to consider when we discuss about the sustainability transition. The first one relates to the population growth that has been touched upon in several presentations during this couple of days of discussion here. And as we know, we are now 8 billion people populating the planet Earth, and we might get up to a point where we are more than 10 billion people over the next 20 to 50 years. The second megatrend is the GDP growth, the economic growth, which has been characterizing the human presence on Earth just since a couple of 100 years. So, as Professor Bianchi was mentioning, this is very much related to the first industrial revolution, which happened at the end, which happened in the 18th century, and since then the growth has been going in exponential way. We also know that associated with this amazing performance in terms of economic growth, we've been experiencing, especially over the last 30 to 50 years, a sharp increase in inequality. If we look at the data of the way in which this growth has been distributed among the people populating our planet, then we can realize that the top 10% of the population has an income or has a share of the world income equal to 52%, whereas the bottom 50% of the population has a share of the income equal to 8.5%. And the picture has become even more dramatic if we look at the wealth, which is basically the same percentage are for the top 10% of the population. The wealth is 76%, whereas for the bottom 50% of the population, the wealth in their hands is only 2%. So these are striking pictures, as we know. What is less known is that if we look at the distribution of income across countries, then we realize that we moved from the 70s to the 2020 from a two-spike distribution, what used to be called a camel distribution with two spikes, to a dromedary distribution, to a single spike distribution. Why is it so? How does it work? That we have a sharp increase in inequality on the one hand, and then on the other hand, we move from a two-spike to a one-spike distribution. Well, this is due to one phenomenon, which is not very much explored, but I think it's very, very relevant, which is the so-called explosion of the middle class. Over the world, worldwide, there is a a growth in the middle class. If we look at the figure here, in 2009, the middle class, which is that class, that area of people that have an income going from around 6,000 to 25, 30,000, depending on how you measure it, in purchasing parity per year per capita. Per capita. Okay, so this has been growing from 1.8 in 2009, and now it's about 4 billion, and it's estimated to be 4.5, so almost 5 billion people in the middle class over the next 7 years. So what does it mean? We have population growth, we have income growth, and we have the explosion of the middle class. It basically means that the demand for goods, food, services is going to grow over the next years. Okay, if we combine these megatrends, then we realize that FAO is estimating that by 2020 the food demand will increase by 60%. It's not just about the increase in the demand, but also the dietary habits of people will change. Because the people are moving from low class to middle class, then their diets will become more meat-based, which means more pollution, more emissions of CO2. Another phenomenon that is occurring, of course, is the accumulation. So we live in the mass consumption society, in the mass consumption era, and we have an accumulation of goods in high-income countries. This is going to be the same pattern is going to be followed if nothing changes. Business as usual, then we will have an accumulation, an amazing accumulation of goods also in these low-income countries that are entering to the middle-income level. And especially we are talking about, of course, China and India, so the Asia. Just to give you an example of how schizophrenic are consumption habits nowadays, here I'm showing you what is being called the nowhere flights. These were flights that were during the COVID, during the lockdown periods, where people could not travel from one place to another. The companies invented this amazing thing, which were nowhere flights, so you could take a flight from Hong Kong, fly for 4-5 hours, and then land back in the very same airport. For people, for consumers to experience, also during the lockdown, the possibility to take a plane. This is just crazy, it's just schizophrenic behavior. Now, well, we all know that this is having an impact in terms of global and local pollutants. I will skip this slide. This is just showing that the global warming is a fact. Yeah, and the graph before was showing basically that there is a rise in the temperature, in the average temperature, which is becoming only positive. Whereas in the past it used to be you could have plus 1 degree among the average. Now it's only plus. It's only plus 1.5, plus 2, and so on. So there is clear evidence about the global warming. And then, of course, we have the local pollutant, particulate matters, and so on, that is also impacting on human health. And there are studies which are still in an early stage, which are showing a possible correlation between local pollutant, the presence of local pollutant, and the spread of the COVID-19 disease. But for sure we know, and this is data which are corroborated by the World Health Organization, for sure we know that the local pollutants are having a strong impact in terms of lung cancer, heart disease, and so on. So, how do we revert these trends? Now it comes the propositive part of my talk, and I will be telling you about the kind of research that we are conducting in my university, in my research team. So the idea that we are pursuing is that we have to move from a linear fossil-based economy, so an economy which is based on the 20th century model of take, make, dispose, take, make, use, and then dispose, into a circular one where you basically are keeping resources into the loop as long as possible, you are reducing waste almost to zero, and you are applying the cascading principle of use of materials across value chains. So this is the kind of transition that we have to make. So we have to move from a linear fossil-based economy into a circular bio-based economy. What do we do in order to facilitate this transition, in order to accelerate this transition? The research that we are conducting, we are not scientists, so we are not involved directly in the development of new technologies, but we work with hard scientists, we work with engineers, chemistry and so on. But we are social scientists. So we tip in with our 2 cents into this debate with research that is related to economics perspective and social science perspective. So on the one hand, we are conducting a sustainability assessment, and then on the other hand, we investigate consumers' behavior, because it's very relevant. For this change to occur, we really need to make sure that consumers are willing to embrace this new change, to embrace this new economy, to buy new products or buy in a different way different products. So consumers do play a key role in this transition. Now, when it comes to the sustainability assessment, we have to understand that sustainability is not easy. It's not an easy concept. It's not something easy to measure. If I want to measure the size of this table, I just take a meter and then I can say that this table is 3.5 meters. One tool in order to measure one dimension. When we talk about sustainability, the dimensions that are into the sustainability are several. At least they refer to the 3 bottom lines, which is economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. But then within each of these pillars, you have a plethora of indicators that you can use. And some of these indicators are also related among them in a trade-off way. So you can improve on one indicator and then go backward on another indicators. So you understand how complex it is to measure sustainability. Yet we have to do it. We have to make an effort in order to measure sustainability in a sound and reliable way. We did a project funded by the European Commission, Star Pro Bio, and now we're involved in another couple of projects which are pretty much related to the legacy of Star Pro Bio. And in this project, we developed a tool which is called the IAT, which is an integrated assessment tool, where we condensated 45 indicators referring to the 3 pillars of sustainability with a specific outlook on circularity and indirect land use change, which is a big problem for the bioeconomy transition. So we identified these tools, and then we created a mechanism to condense these 45 indicators into one single indicator. Why is it important to do so? Because then we have to provide information which is easily accessible precisely to those consumers that I was mentioning earlier, those consumers that have to change their consumption habits. And they have to do so having the right kind of information that we can provide by conducting this assessment. So this is basically the tool that we developed, and just to give you an example of how research can be close to the needs of people. At the end of this project in 2020, we opened a table for developing a standard, a pre-standard actually, which is called Prassi di riferimento in Italian, with the Italian standardization body. And in December 2022, we published this standard, which is a pre-standard actually, which now can be used by companies in order to certify their products. Now we are trying to translate it in English and to make it accepted, endorsed by the European standardization body. I want to give you a quick example of how tricky can be measuring sustainability, assessing sustainability. We published a paper on Scientific Reports last year, where we conducted an assessment on the sustainability, a comparative assessment on sustainability of face masks, comparing reusable face masks, so those that can be washed up to 10 times, with single-use disposable face masks. So basically, we took a case study of the Italian social district where they were making these reusable face masks, and we assessed the sustainability using life cycle thinking approach, and we identified, of course, that the single-use face mask is much more impacting as you can expect, on the environment in terms of resource and ecosystems, as well as on human health. Whereas the reusable one, the one that you can wash up to 10 times, is having a much lower impact. Then we did, as you always should do in sound research, then we did some sensitivity analysis. And then we realized that if we change one single assumption, which is the way in which you are washing the reusable face mask, in the baseline model, we assumed, following the guidelines of the World Health Organization, that the face mask should have been washed at 40 degrees in a washing machine. Now, if we remove this assumption and we assume that people are actually washing them by hands, look what happened. Now, the reusable face mask, hands washed, is the more impacting on them. How tricky can be assessing sustainability. Do I have another couple of minutes? Maybe one. Un minuto. Okay. Just very briefly. We did an experiment about the impact of this certification on modifying consumers' behavior. So we have to assess the sustainability, measure sustainability. I've told you about the tools that we have in order to measure sustainability. Then we use this sustainability assessment to provide eco-labels for consumers. So consumers, when they're facing green products which bears an eco-label, then they're willing to pay even an extra green premium. Usually there is evidence about the green premium, but we found that there is even the willingness to pay an extra green premium when the product is certified as green, okay, as sustainable. And this is also impacts on the shape of the demand function, but I will not say more about this. So just to wrap up, the transition is unavoidable. To accelerate the transition, we need sound socioeconomic and environmental assessment tools of sustainability. This will allow policymakers to undertake much needed policy action and consumer to be more inclined to sustainable products. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup, Dr. Moron, pour votre exposé très intéressant et qui mérite, je crois, une suite pour faire concrétion de certains aspects que vous avez soulignés. Vamos a pasar a la última ponencia de esta sexta sesión. Después tendrá lugar el puscafé. Bien, en este caso no podemos contar aquí con el profesor Domenico Marino, profesor de la Universidad de Reggio Calabria y miembro de la Barcelona Economics Network, porque se lo ha impedido unas circunstancias especiales de última hora. Pero en cambio ha tenido la gentileza de mandarnos un vídeo que vamos a colocar ahora en lugar, de manera que no lo tendremos aquí a nuestro amigo Mimo Marino, pero en cambio lo tendremos en su exposición y lo veremos en pantalla.
Il convient tout d'abord de remercier...
pero por boca de la telematización.
Il convient tout d'abord de remercier le professeur Gilles Aluja pour l'invitation à participer à cet important acte. Dans le contexte actuel des défis mondiaux tels que les changements climatiques et la perte de biodiversité, l'économie de l'environnement apparaît comme un domaine crucial. Ma discussion vise à explorer les relations entre la complexité et la durabilité dans ce domaine, en soulignant à quel point une compréhension approfondie de ces concepts est essentielle pour formuler des stratégies économiques efficaces et durables sur le plan environnemental. Dans le domaine de l'économie de l'environnement, la complexité fait référence au réseau d'interaction entre les systèmes économiques, environnementaux et sociaux. Cette complexité n'est pas seulement un défi, mais aussi une opportunité de favoriser l'innovation et la résilience.
D'autre part, la durabilité se concentre sur l'utilisation équilibrée et consciente des ressources, visant un équilibre entre le développement économique, la protection de l'environnement et le bien-être social. La relation entre ces deux dimensions est cruciale pour orienter les politiques environnementales et économiques vers un avenir plus durable. La complexité de l'économie, de l'environnement, se manifeste par les réseaux de relations interdépendantes entre les facteurs écologiques, économiques et sociaux. Par exemple, la décision de réduire les émissions de CO2 a un impact sur l'industrie de l'énergie, les marchés du travail, les habitudes de consommation et enfin l'écosystème. Cette interdépendance nécessite un approche holistique dans l'élaboration des politiques où la vision à long terme et la capacité à prévoir les conséquences indirectes deviennent cruciales. Dans ce contexte, les modèles économiques traditionnels, souvent basés sur des hypothèses de linéarité et de simplicité, s'avèrent insuffisants. Il est donc nécessaire d'adopter des approches qui tiennent compte de la nature non linéaire et dynamique des systèmes environnementaux. Cela implique l'utilisation d'outils tels que la modélisation des systèmes complexes et l'analyse des scénarios qui permettent d'anticiper les réactions en chaîne et les interactions entre différents secteurs. En économie de l'environnement, la complexité se manifeste de différentes manières, influençant de manière significative à la fois la formulation et la mise en œuvre des politiques environnementales. Tout d'abord, il y a les interactions complexes entre les systèmes naturels et les activités humaines. Par exemple, les activités industrielles peuvent influencer les cycles hydrologiques qui à leur tour affectent les économies locales et mondiales. En outre, la variabilité du climat et les changements environnementaux introduisent des niveaux supplémentaires d'incertitude et de complexité. Un aspect clé de la complexité en économie de l'environnement est l'interdépendance des systèmes. Les écosystèmes, les systèmes économiques et les communautés sont intrinsèquement liés. Un changement dans l'un de ces systèmes peut avoir des effets en cascade sur les autres. Compte tenu de sa nature intrinsèquement complexe et interconnectée, l'économie de l'environnement présente des défis importants en matière de modélisation et de prévision. Les modèles économiques traditionnels sont souvent mal équipés pour gérer la non-linéarité et la dynamique des systèmes naturels. Il est donc nécessaire de développer de nouveaux modèles et d'outils capables de mieux saisir ces dynamiques et de fournir des prévisions plus précises et plus faibles. La complexité de l'économie de l'environnement a des implications importantes pour les décisions politiques et économiques. Les politiques doivent être souples et adaptables pour gérer l'incertitude et la variabilité des systèmes naturels et sociaux. Cela nécessite une approche holistique qui tient compte d'une variété de facteurs et de résultats possibles. Les décisions prises sans tenir compte de la complexité peuvent avoir des conséquences inattendues et potentiellement néfastes. Dans le contexte de l'économie de l'environnement, la durabilité fait référence à l'utilisation responsable et équilibrée des ressources naturelles en veillant à ce que les besoins actuels soient satisfaits sans compromettre la capacité des générations futures à répondre à leurs propres besoins. Ce concept va au-delà de la simple protection de l'environnement et englobe la justice sociale et l'efficacité économique. Une économie véritablement durable exige un changement radical dans la manière dont nous produisons et consommons les biens. Cela implique l'introduction de technologies propres, l'adoption de pratiques de consommation responsables et l'élaboration de politiques incitant un comportement durable. Le Conseil d'économie circulaire, qui vise à réduire les déchets et à réutiliser les ressources en formant un cycle fermé de production et de consommation, joue un rôle important dans ces processus. L'interaction entre la complexité et la durabilité dans l'économie de l'environnement est particulièrement évidente lorsqu'on examine les réponses aux problèmes environnementaux. Par exemple, la transition vers les sources d'énergie renouvelables n'est pas seulement une question technologique, mais implique également des considérations économiques, sociales et politiques. La complexité apparaît dans la gestion de ces différents aspects et dans la nécessité d'équilibrer des intérêts souvent contradictoires. Dans ce contexte, l'un des principaux défis consiste à élaborer des politiques à la fois efficaces et flexibles, capables de s'adapter aux changements rapides et imprévisibles propres au système complexe. Cela nécessite une approche adaptive et participative de l'élaboration des politiques économiques, dans laquelle un retour d'informations continue et des révisions de stratégies sont essentielles. Cette interaction se manifeste de diverses manières, de la planification des ressources naturelles à l'atténuation des changements climatiques et à la gestion des déchets. L'un des aspects essentiels de l'interaction entre la complexité et la durabilité est le besoin d'adaptabilité et de résilience des systèmes économiques et environnementaux. Les systèmes complexes sont par nature dynamiques et imprévisibles, ce qui exige des stratégies qui ne se contentent pas de traiter les problèmes actuels, mais qui sont également flexibles et capables de s'adapter à des conditions futures incertaines. Cela signifie qu'il faut élaborer des politiques qui tiennent compte d'un large éventail de scénarios possibles, au fin de garantir la résilience des écosystèmes et des communautés. La gestion efficace de la complexité dans les domaines de l'environnement nécessite donc une approche systématique qui tient compte des interactions entre les différents secteurs et disciplines. Par exemple, lorsqu'il s'agit du changement climatique, une analyse qui intègre des aspects économiques, environnementaux, sociaux et politiques est essentielle. Une telle approche nécessite une collaboration interdisciplinaire et la capacité de voir au-delà des frontières traditionnelles des disciplines. L'intégration de la complexité et de la durabilité pose des défis importants en termes de politique et de prise de décision. La nécessité d'équilibrer les besoins économiques avec les besoins environnementaux et sociaux peut conduire à des compromis difficiles. Par exemple, le développement d'infrastructures durables peut nécessiter d'importants investissements à court terme pour des bénéfices à long terme, un défi particulièrement évident dans les pays en développement. L'innovation technologique joue un rôle crucial dans l'interaction entre complexité et durabilité. Le développement de nouvelles technologies peut contribuer à réduire l'impact environnemental des activités économiques et à améliorer l'efficacité des ressources. Cependant, la technologie seule n'est pas une panacée. Elle doit être intégrée dans un cadre de politique et de pratiques durables. En conclusion, la complexité et la durabilité de l'économie et de l'environnement sont les deux faces d'une même médaille. Il est essentiel de comprendre la nature complexe du système environnemental et économique pour élaborer des stratégies durables à long terme. Cela nécessite un changement de paradigme dans la manière dont nous abordons les questions économiques et environnementales, en favorisant une pensée systématique et intégrée. Ce n'est pas qu'à cette condition que nous pourrons espérer révéler efficacement les défis environnementaux de notre époque et assurer un avenir durable aux générations futures. Merci de votre attention.
Bien, con esta intervención damos por finalizada la sexta sesión. Vamos a hacer un pequeño receso y luego inmediatamente iremos a desarrollar la séptima y última sesión de este seminario. Vamos a reemprender esta séptima y última sesión con la participación activa del excelentísimo doctor Dobrica Milovanovic, decano de la Universidad de Kragujevac en Serbia, el excelentísimo doctor Carlo Morabito, profesor de la Universidad de Reggio Calabria y miembro de la Barcelona Economics Network, y el excelentísimo doctor Jean-Pierre Dantin, académico correspondiente por Suiza. Finalmente, este presidente va a presentarles a ustedes algunos aspectos del futuro de nuestra actividad. Vamos, pues, a empezar esta última sesión haciendo una llamada al doctor Dobrica Milovanovic.
Your Excellency, dear President Ilaluha, first of all, thank you for your kind invitation. And like this? Should I switch or is that okay? Okay, thank you. Dear Mr. President, distinguished academicians, dear colleagues, it's my pleasure to participate again in this prestigious seminario, and I want to express my great satisfaction. I will say some words about the quality of life and how it is connected with economy. I'm not economics, but maybe I have contributed a little. So we all, of course, want to live good life. And it should be quite natural that we want it for the other people. Although quality of life is quite subjective measure and it varies according to personal preferences, our understanding still is that mainly good life is made of many different parts, such as being healthy, being safe, living in decent homes, having good job, enough money, access to great good services, access to healthy food, of course, above all, clean environment, and of course, having loving relationships and enough spare time. We all have different perceptions. What makes me happy might not be the same as make you happy. OECD put that subjective well-being reflects the idea that the way people experience certain circumstances is as important as the circumstances themselves. That is why objective welfare measures, such as income or employment, often tell an incomplete story of how people's lives are going. For instance, COVID-19 pandemic caused that the life satisfaction declined in spite of economic growth. Various indicators are used to show economic well-being. GDP is widely used to measure the overall economic activity within a country. However, GDP doesn't capture distribution of income or well-being of individuals. And it treats many economic activities that are bad for humans. In many cases, countries have similar GDPs, but they differ significantly in levels of natural health or education. That is why many authors have questioned the equivalence of economic growth and the growth of people's well-being. A renowned economist and Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz recommended 8 areas of quality of life which should be considered. They are financial standard of living, health, education, personal activities including work, political and government participation, social relations, environment and security. Another story is that our perception of good life is not always in accordance with the sustainability of our planet. Until recently, it was believed that there was no conflict between economic growth and ecology. That at the same time, we can grow the economy and protect the environment. We still can hear such claims. However, the obsession with economic growth put us on the path to ecological collapse. It is destroying the foundation of life on Earth, and no country, rich or poor, can expect to escape the horrible consequences if things go on as they are. At the same time, no country on Earth is doing enough to prevent ecological collapse and climate change. A global scientific study involving 130 nations claims that industrial society pushed 1 million species to the brink of extinction. Plants and animals are vanishing tens to hundreds of times faster than during the past 10 million years. The possibility of unlimited growth is an illusion that has been practiced for decades and which helped to double the size of global economy every 25 to 30 years, while eroding the very foundations of society. This illusion states that the global economy, through technology development, can continue to grow annually by 2 to 3%, still respecting our planet's environmental limits. It is hard to believe, having in mind how tightly environmental depletion and pollution have been tied to growth in the past. We should always keep in mind that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there has been not only exponential growth of the economy, but also of the population. The non-living population, such as building, cars, etc., have grown even more rapidly. So now we live in full world, but we behave as if it were empty, with plenty resources for the future. When the economy grows in physical dimensions, it takes matter and energy from the rest of the ecosystems. According to the laws of conservation of matters and energy, which says that energy and matter can neither be created nor destroyed, an economy must encroach on the ecosystem, diverting matter from previous natural uses. More human economy, which means more people, commodities, means less natural ecosystem. So there is an obvious physical conflict between the growth of the economy and the preservation of the environment, because the economy is a subsystem of the ecosphere. Herman Daly gave a vivid example. In the past, the fish caught was limited by the number of fishing boats and fishermen. Now, it is limited by the number of fish and their capacity to reproduce. So, more fishing boats will not result in more caught fish. That is why there is a growing concern that presently dominant frameworks in economics no longer provide a way of adequately addressing the problems of globalizing and rapidly changing world. Thus, the fundamental question is, what should be changed in economics in order to address the issue of how to protect and promote sustainable human well-being, and how economics can strike a balance between different stakeholders, policymakers, scientists, employers, and citizens. Multi-year scientific studies have concluded that only a fundamental economic transformation would allow the sustainability of our planet. We should abandon a growth at all cost mindset and reorient itself for human well-being. In his book, How Economics Can Save the World, Eric Engren states that economics has always been about improving the world and helping people to live more meaningful, satisfying lives, and that the economics will continue at the same path. Therefore, in order to avoid the dark scenario and save our planet, we must move to steady-state economy, which is based on the integrated view of the economy as a subsystem of the finite and non-growing ecosphere. First of all, we should change the way we measure progress and replace GDP as the indicator of the total values of goods created and services provided by a country in 1 year, but not indicator of economic health. GDP doesn't make difference between sources of income. As the GDP doesn't measure well-being of the population and the use of natural resources, more effective indicators should be used. For example, the genuine progress indicator, which measures the net benefits of economic activities, not only the benefits, but also the costs. In 2010, then UK Prime Minister David Cameron announced a national well-being program. He said, we will start measuring our progress as a country not just by how our economy is growing, but by how our lives are improving. One of the key measures is limit the use of the resources by respecting 3 key rules. First, renewable resources should not be depleted faster than they regenerate. The second, non-renewable resources should not be depleted faster than renewable substitutes are developed. And third, waste from all resource use should not be returned to the ecosystem faster than they can be absorbed by natural system. The economics must support the restoration of natural resources and biodiversity because they provide many services that are critical to our survival and have a high economic value. For example, water is purified by filtering through soil and rock. Flowers are pollinated by insects so that these plants can produce fruit as food. Natural processes are estimated to be worth more than $125 trillion per year. This is almost twice the amount created by humans annually. However, as more and more wild areas are destroyed or polluted, these processes are slowly being lost. This is why supporting the restoration of the natural processes is invaluable and for strengthening the economy based on well-being. Another measure is implementing social cost pricing, which means that consumers have to pay the true cost of products and services instead of being subsidized. It would dramatically decrease thoughtless consumption, but consumers might not appreciate high prices, of course, so that's why shift to social cost prices needed to be supported by the government. This can involve implementing new taxes, for example, on greenhouse gas emissions. Unfortunately, the present situation is quite opposite. Some industries that harm environment are subsidized, like fossil fuel industry, which receives annually about $5 trillion. To save our planet, these subsidies should be given to industries that promote social and environmental health. One of the measures can be restoring the local productions. This has several advantages, including reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, restoring local employment, or food security. This can be encouraged by changing existing barriers such as trade agreements or export subsidies. Reforming land ownership is also the measure which means returning forest and agricultural land to the people that will manage them in environmentally and socially sound way and contribute to increasing biodiversity. This positive trend can be supported by preventing further conversion of agricultural and forest lands. Limiting inequalities can help as well. Establishing minimum and maximum income limits maintains differences large enough to preserve incentives, but small enough to prevent the plutocratic tendencies of market economies. Reducing working hours but restoring full employment also can be considered. Underemployment is the price we pay for growth from automation, offshoring, deregulated trade, or a cheap labor immigration policy. Under steady state conditions, productivity improvements would lead to expanded leisure time rather than unemployment. Stabilizing population is one of the key measures. In wealthy countries, it can be done by removing incentives to increase population. In poorer countries, the best is to provide education, access to birth control, and equal rights for women. Of course, all these and other measures should be supported by reforming the monetary system and the banking sector. We believe that economics has the power to make the world better, happier and safer place, a world more fit for human flourishing in the manner that medicine cures disease. Economics really can save the world. And finally, I would like to convey you what our famous movie maker and actor, ex-Yugoslav one, Stevo Žigon, said about life. He said, there is no education for happiness. Each person has to discover that by himself. Not to make life beautiful. Life doesn't need to be beautiful at all, but life needs to be meaningful. Sometimes it is much more meaningful when it is painful. You have to go through all the pains, through all the possible sufferings in order to get some idea how much man is needed by man. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Rogamos haga acto de presencia en este estrado al excelentísimo doctor don Carlo Moravito, profesor de la Universidad de Reggio Calabria y miembro de la Barcelona Economics Network.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Let me first thank Professor Hilalua for this important success of mixing high scientific quality of the meeting and of the many presentations and the familiar atmosphere that we feel here. As pertinently said by Professor Gutu yesterday, we are home here. So this is an important aspect from our perspective. I'll present some consideration on novel paradigms in engineering for facing the different aspects that have been presented before, in particular this morning by Rector Petre Roman, chaos and uncertainty in a resilient planet. So the three keywords are chaos, uncertainty, and resilience. We live in a world in which our life is endangered, of course. And in my opinion, and many scientists have to change the paradigms in order to face, to deal with novel challenges. And in particular, we feel a great responsibility because we have to give the voice of science because scientists carry a responsibility, bring on a responsibility on proposing novel solutions to big problems. In particular, we need innovative scientific models to predict this kind of dynamics that are very rapid and very unpredictable. And in particular, the chaotic behavior is what represents unpredictability. The concept of uncertainty should be advanced in the concept of deep uncertainty, profunda incertidumbre. And I will present just some aspects of a new decision theory which is called info gap decision theory. And finally, I'll give some words regarding the resilience. We can change our mind. We have to think to how to act after the crisis, not only to think to procedures to avoid crisis, because crises often happen without any message. Think to COVID-19. After the shock, yeah. We live in a very in a world of networks, water, mobility, energy networks, hospital facilities, telecommunication systems. And all of these systems are subject to deep uncertainties. We have seen during the COVID-19 the pressure on the hospital, for example, but climate change, wars, globalization of religious contrast, infectious spread, financial crisis, excess of water and energy resources consumption. So our life on the planet is increasingly fragile. We feel like drowning, like sinking down, but because we have developed an anxiety to lose our concrete life made of different things mentioned by Dobrica before my presentation. So, in particular, the concept of resilience can yield a framework on how to improve our system in the case of uncertain future events, by incorporating some capabilities like persistence, adaptability, transformability. But unfortunately, the existing formalization of the concept of resilience, for example, in engineering, are dependent on some critical assumptions: linearity, stationarity, ergodicity, well-characterized uncertainty. But we don't live in this world no more. And so it is important to introduce a concept of decision making under deep uncertainty. We have here the maestro of incertidumbre, Professor Jaime Gilalua, which proposed many books on the theory of decision in uncertainty. So we start from these books, and of course we have to think to more deep way of considering uncertainty. Of course, in economic, the International Monetary Fund said that we are experiencing a broad-based, a sharper than expected slowdown, with inflation at highest in several decades. And uncertainty impacts personally our lives and plays on our negativity bias, and also the tolerance to uncertainty that determine how we react. The only solution probably is not scientific one. Of course, uncertainty has been characterized from a scientist's perspective in different science very differently, and roughly can be defined uncertainty as limited knowledge about the future. And this gives rise to the possibility of diverse interpretation of the future. The extent of uncertainty involves also subjectivity. We interpret differently the uncertainty in the future, which is colored by the underlying values and perspectives of the various actors involved and the decision options available. Society is facing unprecedented environmental and socio-economical changes. I will add artificial intelligence to the keywords we discussed along these 2 days. And some uncertainties cannot be quantified correctly or eliminated. So deep uncertainty refer to long-term, Professor Kapczyk, prediction, because we are not able to define the probability distributions or the membership functions in fuzzy systems that we used earlier to represent uncertainty. These deep uncertainties can involve all aspects of a long-term strategic planning problem, including external developments, and the evaluation of systems outcomes by the stakeholders. Of course, it is difficult to make decisions in the presence of deep uncertainty. The related predicted scenario are becoming increasingly difficult. These create anxiety. Professor Askenazi mentioned this morning the neurology perspective. But we have novel computer infrastructures that can help us to make analytics. But also we can solve intensive tasks like meteor prediction at a large scale and in the long term. But this is not sufficient, as we have seen. Also in meteorological prediction, we see that there's a difficulty. If you read on the Google the predictions, we can see that many times it fails. And also we have to prepare to rare events that are no more so rare. I've said that we need to propose innovative instruments and methodologies that imply technological, economic, anthropological, and social aspects. In particular, we can ask, are there any tools and methodologies for decision making under deep uncertainty? How implementing these algorithm solutions in the real world, and how to design strategic plans under deep uncertainty. In particular, this is a list of novel instruments. In particular, I will say some words on infogap and chaos engineering. Clearly, the survival of life in our planet depends on the correct decision making. For the many aspects I present in this list, also rare events, a financial crisis, mobility in the infrastructures. For example, some factors, exceptionally growing oil and gas prices, changing government policies regarding fossil fuels, renewable energy, change in the way we generate electricity and distribute electricity, and of course the legitimate concern over climate change. What is infogap? Very quickly. We normally in engineering, in economics and so on, we search the optimal solution. But probably we have to accept solutions that perform acceptably well, but in a wider range of conditions, seeking robustness instead rather than optimality. In the case of infogap, our requirements is performing adequately rather than optimally in a set of potential scenarios, different scenarios that we are trying to consider. So infogap includes a novel representation of the uncertainty, in particular in terms of deep uncertainty. And we can introduce in particular the concept of robustness, but also the concept of opportuneness, that consists in possibility of alternative decisions. The traditional model predict and then act is no more the more acceptable in many conditions, because when uncertainties are deep, predict then act methods can break down as decision makers and analysts to develop a form of prediction which is called tunnel vision. We see in a tunnel, but we lose the general scenario. In some conditions of deep uncertainties, uncertainties are underestimated. Competing analysis can contribute to gridlock. Misplaced concreteness can blind decision makers to surprise. And we need to do some stress tests that can identify conditions under which a proposed strategy can perform well and when perform poorly. In particular, one of the engineering concept, physics concept that has been introduced along the past decades that have been mentioned this morning by Dr. Petra Roman is chaos. Simply said, we have chaos systems are not deterministic and not random. It's something in between with infinite possibilities of trajectory evolution, which is the best performing and which are the best performing trajectories. You can see here some images of a chaotic behavior in two-center systems, or here it is impossible to predict something in which we have a lot of bifurcation. How, with a small perturbation of the initial conditions, we can reach a totally different place. And this is a representation, artistic rendering of chaos to go out of mathematics. Resilience, to finish my presentation, characterizes a system's ability to retain its original functions in presence of a lot of perturbations. Normally, we studied small-scale resilience, but the knowledge on resilience in large-scale network is important, but our knowledge is limited on this. So we have to define, apart from political views and strategic views, also vision, but we need also analytical tools, novel analytical tools, like the one you presented on the platform of the decarbonization algorithm. And clearly, we need to quantify resilience uncertainty across the network at the macro level and the micro level. In particular, just one figure from a mathematical perspective, because in the case of our world now, we have not to consider our node. We are here in Barcelona, but now we are related to Mimmo Marino in Reggio Calabria and so on. So there is an effect of network on each node. And in particular, the concept of resilience margin can offer some interpretation in small systems. Finally, the chaos engineering is the practice of subjecting applications and services to real-world stresses and failures, and so measure what happens then. In conclusion, the future of life as we interpret it is in danger. Scientists cannot simply extend the previous paradigms to predict. We have to change, to introduce, to propose new paradigms able to cope with the present scenarios. So concepts like chaos, deep uncertainty, resilience should deserve a well-development to move from short-term to long-term prediction. I think that one possible solution is the Barcelona economic networks that already implement this kind of graph network perspective. So thank you very much.
Bien, vamos a continuar y ya finalizar todo el turno de ponencias con la intervención del doctor Jean-Pierre Dantin.
Okay, I'm the last one, so I suppose I will repeat a lot of things that have been said. I cannot acknowledge all of it because I could not be here yesterday, and I will not acknowledge any of it because I don't have the time. So I will probably repeat a number of things since we are talking all about the same topics. I might contradict a few as well, but for the same reason I will not put stress on this contradiction. So we talked a lot about complexity. Let me talk about simplicity. That is simplicity, because we are into a very difficult world and a very complex problem, and at the same time, we can make it relatively simple if we think about what are the foundations of our economic system. What are the foundations of economic system is most of us, I suppose, or maybe these days all of us live in a mixed economic system. That is, it's an economic system where resource allocation is decentralized. And this is very important because decentralization means that, yes, prediction is very important, but it's not indispensable. When it's decentralized and it works, we can let individual make individual decision, and things will go properly. Resource allocation is decentralized. Why is that possible? Because we have a system of markets, and markets guided by prices. That's really the heart of economics. And prices have a very important function in order to make sure that this resource allocation through a decentralized framework will reach a social optimum. Okay? That is, we can let people do what they want because they are guided by prices. In the end, we are going to have a satisfactory outcome. That works, but it still needs some correction, some guidance. So we have a system where it's framed by multitude of state intervention. And it could be intervention at different level of centralization that might not be the state. But so what's the rationale for all of that? How is it that we think that this could work? This could work because what Adam Smith called the invisible hand. And the invisible hand is very important and very counterintuitive. It tells us that in many circumstances, by pursuing our self-interest or profit, we are simultaneously promoting the common good. There is not always an opposition between self-interest, profit, and the common good. And again, that is the basis by which we can imagine even the system that we have, at least as we economists think of it, because we want to maximize social welfare. And what all of economics has shown since Adam Smith is that invisible hand often works. Very often this works, but it does not always work. It needs to be helped and completed by what I call centralized intervention, by collective intervention. It's not the individual that has to decide, it's the collective. Most of the time it's the state. Now, you will recall in this that I'm alluding to the welfare theorems, theorems of welfare economics, and I'm not, of course, innocent in this because part of that was due to the École de Lausanne, which I am affiliated with, and Walras and Pareto. This is not ideology. These are theorems. And we know exactly when is it that it works and when it doesn't work. So we know when is it that we need more or less state. Well, in practice, of course, we have this complementary intervention, the state intervention. In practice, it's a continuum. But we know how to design or to think about it. We know when is it that there is failures and shortcomings of the invisible hand? When is it that invisible hand will not deliver? For instance, for redistribution, we talked about inequality. It's clear that inequality cannot be viewed, or equality cannot be viewed as the result of the market. We know that from the beginning. We have theorems on that. We need state intervention, we need redistribution, and in democracy, that means we need the people to approve of it. We know that we need competition for achieving that. So we need antitrust. We want to make sure that we have no monopoly, no oligopoly. We know the principle, not mean that we always know exactly what to do. And of course, we need that there are markets. If there are externalities is the notion that markets are not there where they should be, then of course the invisible hand cannot work. And we also have issues of informational friction. Let me not talk about that. But we must also recognize that there were weaknesses and failures of the state. Okay, the state does not always do good. Populism, electoralism, corporatism, and lobbying, a bureaucratic weight, all of that. So what we have a system when we have to weight one against the other. And again, if we are in democracy, we have to convince the people to choose the right weighting system. Great place for ideology. Great place for ideology, but at the basis of it, we have theorems, we have a set of theorems that can help us think about it. Now, my topic is the planetary boundaries. They've been evoked and mentioned before. The planetary boundaries, a framework to describe limits to the impact of human activity on the Earth system. Other words have been used today, notably the three principles that were mentioned by the Prime Minister, English Prime Minister would be very good. But what this means, planetary boundaries means that the capacity of the Earth, of our planet, to self-regulate is limited. And we depend on it. It is a critical resource. And we share that resource with all present and future, but we share it also with next generation. Going beyond the limits is a recent phenomenon. It was mentioned, it's population growth and affluence. Okay, we get richer, we get more population, of course, we impose more burden on the planet, and now we are exceeding this burden. We have been slow to recognize it, but it is a fact that it is a relatively recent phenomenon. In 2009, when the notion of planetary boundaries was introduced, two boundaries were crossed, and this was the picture. Okay, there was really clear biodiversity loss and nitrogen cycle. 10 years later, this is the picture. There was clearly more boundaries were crossed. I mean, I hope you all know about this picture, right? I mean, you have climate change on the one hand, but we have all the other domains in which we are potentially excluding, going beyond the safe operating limit, the green area, where we should be operating as a human population, as a human collectivity. And this is now the most recent picture, September 2003, where now we have only 3 of these 9 boundaries that are not exceeded, and we are in deep red in many of the ones. Now, what is the problem of that? The problem of that, this is absolutely major. The recognition that we are beyond planetary boundaries, it's a game changer. It's a game changer because for the first time in modern history, precious and scarce resources cannot be managed by the market. We have a market economy. The market cannot manage these resources. Why not? Because there are no markets. These are resources, this common good, there is no market for it. So the market system works. I can be a promoter of the market system. I'm really very convinced. But I must admit that when there are no markets, the market cannot deliver. Okay? You know, there are no market because there are no corresponding property rights. The owner of the resource is humanity itself, including unborn generation. So there are no markets for the ability of the environment to self-regulate. There are no market for the capacity of the planet to absorb the CO2 without warming. There's no market for the capacity of the planet to accommodate human activity without loss of biodiversity. All of these 9 boundaries correspond to a missing market. It's an externality, but I put it in the wording of the theorems of welfare to really show where we have real problem. There are no markets for essential resources. What do we have to do? Well, first of all, we have to admit that this is the case and that there is a problem of legitimacy for the market system. In the absence of market, the invisible hand cannot work. Prices do not correctly reflect relative scarcities. They give wrong signals. And if prices give, one of my predecessors, the CO2 tax is not a tax, it's a price correction. In a liberal market economy, we need prices to be correct. Otherwise, there is no chance that the invisible hand will work. And CO2 tax, of course, is a correction. We need to have prices that reflect true costs. Or, because obviously so often population will not accept this measure, we need to find other ways to manage the common good. This is, okay. This leads to a systemic challenge. I may have missed, okay. A systemic challenge. In order to preserve our common good, which is natural capital, we need more state. We need more collective intervention. We cannot rely on decentralization. The market cannot do it. But we still, simultaneously, technology has been discussed, we need more technology, we need more capacity to innovate. We need to find new clean technologies. We need to go to the circular economic models, okay? And for that, we need innovation. And we know that in history, there has been a tension between innovation and too much state. So we really have to be creative. This is one challenge that is very important. So the first challenge, dimension of the challenge, is to maintain our capacity to innovate with a larger state footprint. There's a second challenge that I will not elaborate, but the fact is the commons that we are talking about is at the planetary level. It's beyond, goes beyond the nation state. Typically, when we think about state intervention, we talk about the nation or state. Spain, Switzerland, that doesn't work. We are here at the planet level, so we should be working at the multilateral level. And if it doesn't work, it's probably at the continental level. Europe is on good state, in good position in this situation. Switzerland is not such in a good position. And we have a macroeconomic challenge. Why? Well, because once we are in a world of externalities and missing market, then, and that's what I thought I had a slide on that, but I didn't have it, but maybe then I will be on time. The legitimacy of maximizing shareholder value or profit disappear. So it's a real challenge for firms. Maximizing profit, maximizing shareholder value, the Friedman motto, works only when there are markets, when the hypothesis of the welfare theorem function. When there are no markets, the welfare theorem does not apply. Maximizing shareholder values is not going to promote the common good. So profit return may conflict with the common good. And of course, as we know, we need, I mean, that means that we need responsible corporates. That's what we talk about, corporate social responsibility. I love this little piece here, okay? We are all in this situation. If we continue the way we do, with business as usual, we are going to be sitting around a fire with the planet being destroyed. And we will be able to say, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. And of course, we can do that for everybody. Business as usual is not an option anymore. Politicians can say, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we had a great string of successful re-elections. And it's true for central bankers. Okay, that's for me. It's also a dilemma for researchers. And I think this is something important here, because yes, we need to dig deeper, and we are in a very complex world. But in a sense, if we continue to think that the best thing we should achieve is great publications in leading academic journals, we are going to be sitting around that fire with the planet being destroyed. And maybe researchers have to do better than that. So we have a macroeconomic challenge. We need responsible corporate. We need responsible consumers. It's a more complicated world that has been, it's full of moral dilemmas. Profit return may conflict with the common good. Fun, comfort, personal satisfaction may conflict with the common good. Think about what you do for your vacation. Doing well while doing good is the Graal. That would be ideal, but it's an illusion to believe that it will always be possible if prices are not correctly reflecting true scarcities. Prices should be corrected, and that's what it's the first best that we need to get. That's why personally I created Enterprise for Society to inspire and activate the transition to a resilient and inclusive economy within planetary boundaries, mindful of the opportunities and challenges raised by scientific and technological change. Visit our website, and thank you for your attention.
Bien, queridos amigos, El seminario, desde el punto de vista académico, científico, ha terminado, pero evidentemente nuestros contactos continúan, pero también continuarán aún para quienes tengan la oportunidad de quedarse este fin de semana, pues con algunas vivencias que deseamos sean agradables a todos ustedes. Y por fin, pues me toca hacer el papel de cerrar este 18º Acto Internacional de Barcelona. Y lo hago mirando el futuro con esperanza, porque la reunión anual convocada por nuestra red internacional Barcelona Economics Network toca su fin. Y lo hace con la satisfacción de haber alcanzado una parte importante de los objetivos inicialmente propuestos. La ciencia económica ha dado unos pequeños pasos adelante y lo ha hecho aunando esfuerzos y haciendo gala de solidaridad en un momento repleto de inútiles enfrentamientos y estériles vanidades. Gracias. Gracias a todos por su talento y por su esfuerzo, puestos ambos al servicio de la ciencia en beneficio de la sociedad y del mundo en el que todavía podemos convivir. Una pieza básica que va a agrupar este conocimiento científico se podrá encontrar pronto en el legado biográfico de la Real Academia de Ciencias Económicas y Financieras. Las futuras generaciones leerán allí nuestros nombres y en él podrán escuchar nuestras voces. Podrán leer el relato de nuestras vidas y escuchar desde nuestra voz viva las hazañas académicas, vida y obra de todos los miembros de nuestra escuela, la Escuela de Economía Humanista de Barcelona. Somos conscientes de que nuestras tareas no tienen ni tendrán fin mientras la actividad científica esté dando sus frutos, mientras los humanos sean conscientes de que sin la ciencia no existe futuro. Y este futuro depende en gran medida del sujeto y del objeto en que recaen las grandes decisiones sobre la vida en el planeta. En nuestra conferencia inaugural hemos prestado especial atención al objeto de las macrodecisiones, la sostenibilidad de nuestro planeta. Nos corresponde en este Parlamento de clausura hacer referencia al sujeto de las macrodecisiones, es decir, el poder y su polarización en el nuevo orden mundial. De la estructura y funcionamiento del orden mundial penden casi todos los componentes que configuran la vida en la Tierra. A lo largo de varios decenios nos hemos acostumbrado a contemplar la pugna entre los Estados Unidos de América y la Unión Soviética para el dominio del planeta y para la conquista del espacio. Y ahora podemos decir, siempre provisionalmente, que esta competición no ha tenido un claro vencedor. Insistimos todavía. Lo que sí podemos afirmar es que a estas contiendas para conseguir el poder en la Tierra y la conquista de otros planetas se ha añadido otra competición, la descarbonización del mundo. En esta última, el premio es no solo el prestigio y el poder, es también el dinero, a través de conseguir el monopolio de la industria de la descarbonización. Pero es que ahora a los protagonistas de este espectáculo se le están añadiendo otros pretendientes. En efecto, el mundo ya no es cosa de dos. por lo que parece que estamos entrando en una multipolarización como consecuencia de la aparición de unos nuevos polos de desarrollo que se fueron presentando con el acrónimo de BRICS, Brasil, Rusia, India, China, Sudáfrica, cuando se hacía mención a las futuras potencias emergentes. Pero de nuevo, se está pensando en una nueva bipolarización, Estados Unidos por una parte y China por otra. Pero por lo menos para nosotros no se ve clara la idea de si va en el sentido de formar un eje continental chino-ruso de alianza o un eje pacífico chino-americana de tolerancia. Con un cierto temor no exento de admiración, nos llega la información de que los dos grandes polos del poder mundial asignan a la creación de una potente industria para la descarbonización de grandes y costosos programas para la limpieza de nuestro planeta. En nuestra Europa, como se ha dicho, se halla en funcionamiento el modesto Green Deal aprobado en 2020. Por nuestra parte, creemos que nos corresponde el papel de participar en las oportunidades que están surgiendo a lo largo de la transición ecológica en la que nos encontramos. Y para los investigadores de las ciencias sociales y en especial para las económicas, podemos participar a través de los modelos y técnicas de gestión. Utilicémoslas porque disponemos de ellas, como lo hemos demostrado suficientemente cuantos trabajamos como miembros de la Escuela de Economía Humanista de Barcelona. Hagámosla para la paz entre los humanos y entre las naciones. Hagámoslo los unos para los otros para que la palabra solidaridad alcance su mejor sentido. Hagámoslo para aliviar el sufrimiento de los más desvalidos. Y hagámoslo al fin para que aquellos que viven, duermen y mueren en las calles de nuestros planetas y ciudades alcancen el cobijo de sus cuerpos y nuestro amor en sus corazones. Gracias, gracias a todos. No les decimos adiós, sino hasta siempre. El seminario ha terminado, se levanta la sesión hasta esta tarde que la levantaremos de nuevo para disfrutar un poco de buena música y mañana de una pequeña excursión. Muchas gracias.